Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. I hope you had a great day. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories, where people conform to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. The first story is called Karen the Food Critic. I worked at a restaurant that I can only describe as eclectic. Croissants was like a mix between a Mumford & Sons video, an Applebee's and my aunt's house. Glass doors to get in the place, hidden on the back part of a farm property, very hard to find. Imagine an unintentional speakeasy. How I got the job as expo here is quite a story as well, but I stay on point. My job was basically to make sure all food that went out to guests was perfect. At this place I did a lot of serving as well, despite never being assigned tables. When times were slower, I would entertain the staff by balancing plates, silverware and terrines while pretending to trip. I would take my right foot mid-stride and tap the front of it to the back of my left foot, making my whole upper body lunge forward, appearing to trip. It was a crowd pleaser. One beautiful night, a woman came in by herself, screaming of food critic, and was seated at our fairly new server Kara section. I made sure all of her stuff was extra on point, a little heavier on the sauce, etc. Like clockwork, the dinner drops her fork. Kara was super on top of it and said, "I'll get another one for you, ma'am," and went, washed her hands and returned with a new fork. As soon as she began to place the fork down, the critic yells, "Oh my god, could you bring me a fork that you haven't touched all over the place?" Kara was taken aback, as was I, closely watching a potential food critic. She came back towards me, nearly in tears, saying, "This is the 15th stupid BS thing that's happened today. I'm so done." I consoled her and said, "I got this, hang tight," which was code for "check out what's about to happen." Cue malicious compliance. I come out from behind the server station with all the flair of a campy magician. I used my left hand to flare my imaginary cape off of me as I tango strided directly towards the food critic's table, making sure she saw me, and my theatrics guaranteed she would continue to hold my gaze. My right hand held out an extended index finger as I continued to tango towards her with a shiny new fork, perfectly balanced on it. It was a longer walk than I had prepared for, so I slip coolly back into normal stride. Then I pretend to trip as the fork lunges towards her, but never leaving my finger. She flinched, shouted so bad it was comical, and all I could say was, "Your fork," as I'm choking back laughter. I quickly turned back around, flipping my imaginary cape again, and was concerned at first because all I could see was the very top of Kara's updo. She missed it? Nope. She was buckled over and tear-filled laughter. That's the end of the first story, and I have a question for you. Karen or not? Was she really a Karen for just doing her job? Or is criticizing professionally the perfect job for a Karen? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The next story is called New Policy and New Manager. Bad combination. I was the assistant manager in a discount retailer. Every few days, someone in corporate would come up with an idea, designed to look good on paper in an office somewhere, I'm sure. Maybe it's a beautiful PowerPoint display or an Excel sheet loaded with formulas. All fantastic in theory, but painful to implement in real life. On this day, an email came. Basically that from here forward, anything purchased by staff that was going to be in the staff area would have to have a manager signed till receipt attached. There would be a 2 days grace, and then anything found on the next area manager call would be noted and binned immediately. So regardless if this was a sandwich and a drink for lunch, a jar of coffee or a full shop, it would be binned. Cameras everywhere except the toilet cubicles weren't enough. The company, unable to hold managers, was on a huge recruitment drive. Rather than promote from within, they decided to promote from outside to fill the positions faster. My store gets a new store manager with limited previous experience and how to make his name in the company. Immediately he hits the canteen, bins everything with no receipt, everything, food and non-food. He doesn't give a crap. The staff is angry. Words travel fast. Now I've paid my dues between the on-trade and retail. I started at the bottom sorting bottles for recycling as a kid. And I know enough to know that I and my colleagues are only numbers in the corporate machine. Disposable, replaceable, and necessary inconvenience that is to be treated as such and never to be treated as equal to the customer, even when they are the customer. Corporate never considered for a moment just how much the staff spent. 45 to 50 people throughout the week supplementing the sales. Understand that when someone is on a time break, remembering the receipt is not a priority, and then trying to find a manager to sign it. I know I'd often be in the cash office counting tills, and company policy didn't let you leave that room in the middle of a count with a safe open. So by the time a signature was obtained, a fair chunk of your 15 or 30 minute break was gone, and at your own expense. And this applied to me as well. I was expected to get whoever was on with me to sign my receipts. I had a very quick meeting with everyone I'd see over the next few days, explaining this new piece of stupidity and why the coffee, sugar, etc. had vanished, and that it was entirely the new guy. I also pointed out very clearly that anything purchased in the major retailer directly opposite was outside of the scope of our employer and could not be touched and needed no receipts or proof of any kind. And if it was touched, I would report it directly to the highest available person I could get, bypassing the area management. It took 3 weeks before the call came. During that time, we stuck to the rules to the letter. The store was down on its week-on-week figure against last year for the last couple of weeks by a few hundred. Guess why? The area manager arrives to investigate how the new store manager is letting the figure slip. Puts me aside and says what the funk is happening with this drop-off. I explain what happened, how all the food and stuff was tossed out with no concern, and how with this situation the only option is to shop elsewhere. He looks shocked, like, how could these idiots do this? He goes off on his phone, comes back and calls me and the new guy into the office. Says unofficially revert to normal. This is the only blip in my area, get these figures right for next week. It was too late to fix the next week, but within 2 weeks we were okay. The new guy was seen as the savior and got moved to a brand new store and lasted a month before his team turned on him. Let me know, bad manager or bad policy? I think both. Even as the new guy, some discretion when applying such a rule should be common sense. What do you think? The third story is called Just Following the Bylaw to the Letter. I pulled out my gas-powered pressure washer this past weekend for the first time in 3 years. Figured it was well past time to do some property cleanup. Started at 11 AM on Saturday morning, as I didn't want to start too early out of respect for my neighbors. Knocked off around 4 with a couple of breaks in between. Got the back and both sides of the house done, lot of concrete patio. Figured I can finish the front driveway and retaining wall the next day. Fired it up on Sunday at 11 AM and got to work for an hour or so, broke for lunch, then back at it at 1. Maybe an hour or so later, I'm interrupted by the city bylaw enforcement officer who is responding to a noise complaint. Apparently, there is a bylaw that prohibits power equipment on Sundays. Okay, I had no idea. Just a warning, no ticket. The guy was actually very nice. I'm a bit annoyed that my neighbors called bylaw on me without at least coming to talk to me first, but okay. At this point, there's a huge mess all over the end of my driveway, the sidewalk and the street. So I asked the officer if it's okay if I quickly take 5 minutes to clean the mess up and push it all together. He says sure, no problem, and I quickly start cleaning up. Cue not one but 2 of my old geezer neighbors to come running out of their houses to attack the poor bylaw kid. A minute later he comes back and says, sorry, you need to shut down now. Okay, he is just doing his job, but now I'm mad. I've lived here for 8 years and none of these old jerks have ever even said hello to me or my family. So I get the details of the exact bylaw. Nothing on Sunday. Saturday 9 to 5. Should have started earlier. Monday to Friday 7 to 7. As he is leaving, I call out very loudly to him. Not really to him. So just so I'm clear, 7 AM Monday morning is a-okay. Bright and early at the stroke of 7 AM Monday morning, I put an hour of pressure washing before work. Tuesday morning another bright and early start. The Wednesday session was truly awesome. Who should stop by this morning while I was working on my retaining wall and sidewalk but my neighbor, Baldy McBylaw caller. I gave him a friendly wave and a neighborly good morning and continued with my work until I ran out of gas. He hung around for a while, glaring unhappily at me, but must have realized that there was really nothing he could do about the situation he had caused. He slunk away a few minutes later. I'm running out of things to pressure wash. But my other neighbor has let me know I can borrow his grinder so I can finally get rid of that piece of rebar sticking out of the concrete at the side of my house. But we have holidays till tomorrow, so I guess it will have to wait until Tuesday at 7 AM. Is OP a jerk for following the rules to the letter, or is the neighbor the bad one? What do you think? I think the neighbor really did the wrong thing by not just talking to his neighbor. But having power equipment start every day at 7 AM next to you can also be kind of frustrating. The next story is called Personal Responsibility. I've been doing all my shopping online, from groceries to clothes, everything. This means I usually get a lot of deliveries. I also buy a lot of stuff for my family to use, especially groceries and basic necessities. I started buying more from small local businesses, it being the demic and me wanting to help them more instead of big businesses like Amazon. This has meant having to deal with incredibly vague or straight up wrong delivery information. I've worked at a small business before, so I expected these problems and don't mind it. Due to a few weeks ago. Mom doesn't work anymore, Sis is on term break. I'm working from home having a meeting. A delivery comes and no one answers the door. I have my headphones on, so I can't hear the bell. The delivery man calls me and tells me he has been ringing at the door and no one is answering, even though he can hear the TV. I apologize and run out to collect the parcel and see my mom in front of the TV with so much indifference. This makes me mildly annoyed and I ask her nicely to help open the door next time. Immediately she screams at me for assuming she has nothing to do, which set off this shouting match between her and me. My sister comes out of her room, takes my mother's side and shouts at me for being rude, just for expecting my mother to answer the door. At this point I'm livid. I ask if it's too much to expect from my own family to help with these things, especially when I'm working. They both go on about how it's my personal responsibility to collect my own deliveries, and that I should not take for granted that they will help just because they are at home, and that I should tell them when I have deliveries coming, to which I try to explain about the often vague delivery estimates I get. This one in particular was supposed to come 2 days later. I point out to them that most of the deliveries that come from me end up being shared by the family, i.e. the groceries, coffee, necessities, etc. And that at the start of the year, before my mom quit her job, I was working from home, collecting everyone's deliveries even when no one tells me about any incoming ones. I singled out one day my sister had 4 deliveries and I collected them all with no complaints. But obviously none of it gets through to them and I give up the argument since I was outnumbered. Bring on the malicious compliance. I stopped ordering groceries for the whole family and food runs out. Both mom and sis just assumed that I would order more, and when I don't, they question me about it. I tell them that it's their own personal responsibility to get their own groceries. A couple of deliveries came from my sister when she wasn't home, and I didn't bother receiving them because the personal responsibility was hers to collect. Plus, she didn't tell anyone about them. Turns out one of those deliveries was a laptop, and because no one answered the door, it was left outside and got stolen. My sister got rightfully angry at me and my mother, but I used their personal responsibility excuse back on her. Now no one is talking to each other, but I don't care. I feel like I've willingly and readily helped them, but when I ask for help in return, it's way too much for them to do so. Is OP the jerk in this story? Everybody did things wrong in my opinion, but I would like to know what you think about the situation. The last story is called Know Your Rights. This happened a long time ago, somewhere around 2012 or 2013. Had a good friend who I smoked cigars with, and he had a friend named Jim. I didn't see Jim very often as we lived in different cities, but every time I visited, we would smoke cigars in the park. Well, near the park. Jim was probably the smartest guy that I ever met. We called him Subsection 6 because he was always finding loopholes for absolutely everything. He's the kind of guy that would read all the tax laws and interpretation bulletins and mold his life to that. He was one of the first people that was working from home. He had his printer in a different room than where he had his office, so that he could claim more square footage as the home office. He was that kind of guy. And he wasn't an accountant or anything. He was an IT guy. He just reads a lot. One day, the 3 of us went down to the beach to smoke cigars. In parks, you're not allowed to smoke, but we grabbed our shares and went anyways. The tide was low, so we went down just past the rocks where the sand started and smoked away. That's where I heard the story. Einstein told a story about if he had 1 hour to solve a problem to save his life, he would think of the proper question for 58 minutes. Well, Jim is one of those kinds of guys that ask questions that we don't think about. He looked around the park because he was busted one time and he asked himself this question. I can see the property line where the road is. I can see the property line where there's a house next door. And he can see the property line where there was a hotel next. But where's the property line when you're looking out at the ocean? He did his homework and he found out that while the city owned the foreshore, it was DFO that owns the ocean from the high tide line down. That is Crown land and they don't have a prohibition for smoking on the ocean. That is where we had our chairs today, he told me the story. He lives in a retirement city with lots of old ladies who have their morning walks at the same time he has his morning cigar. That's how he got busted in the first place, but he was ready after he did his research. He used a printer that was in the other room and he printed out the laws. He also made a phone call to one of his cigar buddies who was a lawyer who knew a lawyer that did property stuff. I'm not talking about real estate transaction when you buy a house. I'm talking about property rights, air rights, things like that. A lot higher up in the food chain. Top floor, corner office kind of guy. So, depending on the cigar, you're looking at 45 minutes to smoke a Robusto to an hour and a half for a Churchill or anything bigger than that. Soon thereafter, the Karens came by, complaining about him smoking in the park, even though he was in the ocean. This was even years before anyone was called Karen. So the Karens started bugging him and threatened to call police or bylaw, and he told him to go ahead. He just started his cigar, so he had plenty of time. He sent a message to his lawyer friend of a friend to give him a heads up that he might be calling later. No problem. Well, the Karens didn't just call bylaw, they called the police. So Jim continued smoking a cigar while he handed over the printout regarding foreshore ownership. It's not the fault of the police because they are used to speeding and stuff like that, but they didn't know this law. Bylaw comes by and pretty much the same. So he gets on his phone, shows him the lawyer's website and makes the call. Meanwhile, the cops and bylaw are phoning their supervisors about this as well. Of course, the Karens are not happy, so they start complaining about secondhand smoke, but they don't have any legal basis. Jim talks to the property rights lawyer on speakerphone, and he says for the police and bylaw supervisors to give him a shout, and he will enlighten them about where park property begins and ends. The epilogue is that whenever he's smoking at low tide and bylaw comes by, they always shake their head and wave. They told him they've had complaints about him smoking in the park, and they now ask where is the guy, in the park or down on the sand. Because the sand isn't the park, it's the ocean. And now it's your time to shine. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories? I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.